Got some issues that nobody can see. I breathe into the life you. It's only right. Listen. Soundtrack to my life. Welcome. So this is going to be my review, I say review reluctantly. It's going to be more of just a talk or a discussion about The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And the reason why this book's so important to me, and the reason why I wanted to be my first real review on this account, is because I started reading probably about 5-6 months ago, maybe pushing 6 now. And I absolutely love it now. It's all I do. I don't have a TV anymore. I just read all day. But this is the one book that started that all for me. Like, I remember when I first opened it up and I was like, yo, it was the first time I was reading something and knew it was a classic. Like, outside of me going to Barnes & Nobles or going to bookstores and seeing the classics like section and picking a book from there, it was like I was reading it and I was like, I see why everyone loves this. I see why it's acclaimed the way it is. But I'm going to try to touch on the plot a little bit. So maybe some more stories that can kind of tie in from like mythology and other kind of stuff. Just really a bunch of stuff. It's not going to be any kind of structure. I don't really like writing scripts. I never wrote a script for any of my videos. I got the camera, I turn it on, I kind of just sit here and talk. But I do have a lot to say about this book and the themes, just the characters, Oscar Wilde himself. Like, I have so much to say, so I think it'd be a pretty interesting video. If there's any other books you want me to talk about or give more in-depth thoughts on, just kind of go deeper into the story or the themes, comment and I'll try and do a video on it. That's all I got for the intro. Let's kind of get to the video. So just an overall summary. The book takes place in 19th century Victorian era London. It's about a young man named Dorian who's an aristocrat, young, handsome, can do no wrong in society. Everyone that sees him, everyone that talks to him, always just big him up to make it seem like, I don't think at this point in the book he's vain in the beginning, but they big him up to where all he sees in society is people glorifying him. And the book kicks off with a man named Basil and Lord Henry, who are two vital people in the book. But Basil is a painter and he's very fond of Dorian, and then there's Henry, who is Basil's friend but has never met Dorian yet. So skipping a few parts, Dorian comes to sit for a painting because Basil wanted to make a portrait of him. And here's where it all goes left. So I'm a big advocate for the entire book. The entirety of the whole book is Lord Henry's fault. But I'll get to that a little later. But while they're sitting for this painting, Henry just likes to hear himself talk. And he likes to be a contrarian and throw anecdotes all the time just to say something. And he notices on Dorian that he has been bigged up his whole life, but he doesn't truly know the magnitude of that. So when there's a break from Dorian sitting from the painting, he takes Dorian outside and they're talking about just like life per se. And the one thing that sparks the whole book, the one statement sparks the whole book, is Henry tells Dorian that his beauty and his youth is all he has in life, and if he loses it, there's nothing else really to live for. The exact page is page 24, at least in the, I have the Penguin edition, and it says, because you have the most marvelous youth, and youth is the only thing worth having. Henry basically tells Dorian that youth is all that matters, and this marvelous youth he has is the only thing that has any value in life. And in the beginning of the book, Dorian doesn't believe him. He's like, I don't feel that way. But all it takes for someone that young that's only heard good things in his life until this point, I think he's probably 18 or so. It doesn't really say an age. But whenever I had it in my head, I envisioned like an 18-year-old. But I think he's like 18 or so. And he's never heard anything like this in his life. He's only heard people bigging him up. And then someone that's presumably knows what he's talking about. It says Lord Henry's very well dressed. He's very approachable when it comes to like listening to what he has to say. So someone that has more of this guise of like trustworthiness says one thing to you that like shocks his whole worldview. So like I said, before this moment, Dorian wasn't like this. He never had that vein of feeling about himself. But his dialogue after that one moment completely shifts the whole book. So skipping ahead a little bit, they walk back into the painting room, and Dorian goes back to sitting for the painting. So after the painting is done, he gets a glimpse of what the painting looks like. Basil says, come look at the painting. He gets a glimpse of what it looks like, and he realizes that the painting will forever be young and he will age. But when I first read the book, I was like, oh, it's about to get crazy. And that makes him feel a kind of way, because after what Lord Henry said, he had sat for the painting for probably, another few hours, and he had time to just marinate on the thought of, maybe this youth is all I have, it's all I've heard my entire life. Maybe this is the only thing that matters in life, and once I lose it, I don't think he knows what the consequence would be, but he just doesn't want to lose what he thinks is the only thing that's valuable. So he sees the painting and he lashes out at the painting, and he gets mad at Basil. He's just mad at the world in this one moment, and he out of a crazy turn of events, Dorian exclaiming to the world said, if I ever grow old, I'll kill myself. But I can't lie, when I first read it, I was like, yo, what am I about to read? This is crazy. And brief sidebar, I have not reread this book. I know all this stuff on top of my head because it was that powerful to me. Like when I was reading it, I was like, yo, this book is revolutionary. Like I knew it was gonna be something that was like gonna change how I saw literature. But anyway, after he exclaims that to the world, he then makes the probably the most pivotal moment in the book, other than something later on in the book. But anyway, after he exclaims that to the world, he then says, he like makes a deal. It doesn't really say what he made a deal with. I like to say the devil though. But essentially, he makes a deal to where the painting will reflect all of his moral injustice, all of his sins, anything he does wrong. It'll reflect on the painting and not him, and he'll never age. So everything that he sees as wrong in his life will never reflect on him. He'll never truly feel it, or he'll feel it, but it won't be seen on him, and it'll only be seen on the painting. That was a pretty in-depth summary of the first kind of maybe 35-ish pages of the book. But that's the spark of the book. That's what the flesh of the story is about. So from then on, the entire book, he acts certain kind of ways. And him not being able to see his sins on himself and really like in the mirror when he sees himself, like he can't really truly see what he's doing. So he'll do a lot of bad things out of the, you can't really blame him, but you can. That's a whole topic in itself. But he had no way to be accountable for his sins. It was only strictly on morals. Since he truly couldn't see the sins he was committing and he couldn't really see it in the mirror, he would have to then rely strictly on his mind and morals because he could still decipher good and bad. So he was still choosing to do bad, but he was only choosing to do bad because he could not see his sins. Bro, when I was reading, I was like, yo, like I knew it was going to go left the second he made that deal with the devil, because before then, I think people underestimate the power of everyone in your life telling you you're just this great person. They like bigged him up to where he was just the best thing. And one person that seems trustworthy, that seems like he has knowledge about something, says one thing to plant a seed in your head and it completely shocks your whole worldview. Like all it took was that one statement. Crazy. And then another thing, I don't think for the entirety of the rest of the book that there was a paragraph that went by that they mentioned Dorian. They did not mention Henry or Harry. They're the same person, by the way. But they would always mention them together because they were always together from then on. Like Dorian became like his apprentice. He tried to like emulate his life around Henry. Now you can argue, I've seen this argument before, no one can truly change who you are. They can only plant seeds into your psyche to where it just amplifies who you already were going to be. Like I've seen arguments that Dorian was going to be like that regardless. If like, well, set aside the whole deal with the devil thing, because that's more mystical. Just off of just ethics and more like logic here. I've seen people say that Dorian, regardless, would have ended up being vain if Henry didn't tell that to him, because either someone else was going to, or he would have came to it himself. But I disagree. I think you could see like how he was speaking to Basil, or how Basil described him in the beginning of the book before that Henry told him that one statement. He was a completely different person. And it felt like to me when I was reading it, and it was cool to see this so early in the book, it took like 20 pages for Dorian to be speaking to Basil like with flowery, almost approachable language to everybody. Basil describing him as this great person. It instantly flips after that to him saying, if I grow old, I'll kill myself. And then 10 pages after that, like he starts talking about Sybil, who I'll get to later. But just a lot of bad stuff happens in the span of like, give or take 10 paragraphs of like a complete change in character. Oh my God, it's amazing. Like this book's actually crazy. Bro, when I was reading it, I knew what I was reading was like, this is next level stuff. Now I promised myself that I would not spoil every single part of this book. I wanted to give you a brief spoiler. It's not brief, it was a pretty big spoiler. But of just the early pages, because I think they're so powerful, and me telling you that could get you to read the book but not know the rest. Like I think I gave you enough to where you could like really go with that. So I don't want to get too in depth for like drilling down everything like I just did for the rest of the book. But I do want to touch on some topics from some more of the book, and I want to pull from some other like mythologies and stories that kind of relate. All kind of other stuff in this video. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but this book's amazing and it needs to get the justice it deserves. But I do want to touch on some of my favorite points in this book because there's so much stuff in this book. So the first thing I want to touch on is the Sybil arc. So I probably read like 40 or so books at this point. If I had to rank like a top 5 favorite like portions or sections of a book, the Dorian and Sybil arc from beginning to end is probably top 5. Like the last 2 chapters of The Stranger, Albert Camus might be up there. Obviously the first like 50, 60 pages of Odyssey I mean, you can't really beat that. I'll go, Kafka Metamorphosis for like the first 10 or so pages when he's like realizing that he's a bug. That could be number 1. Chapters 4 to 6, Frankenstein, crazy. I don't know. That was a tangent. All I have to say, Sybil and Dorian is definitely top 5. Just because, for one, once again, you have to blame Henry. I'm not going to say they were going to be fine without Henry's advice on the situation, but I think they would have been better off. I think James would have had some kind of like interference with it later on, but that's down the line. Like, they were young still. Like, I think it would have worked. But Dorian goes to Henry for advice because Henry is his almost mentor at this point. Even though it's not ever officially said, but he's always with Henry. He's almost like riding his coattails because no one had ever talked to Dorian the way that Henry was talking to him. Like, I could see how someone young and impressionable could fall for someone like Henry to where, like, he just felt like he was an authority figure. Even though it doesn't say Henry's occupation in the book, it doesn't say what he does. He's bad to his wife, but he has a way with words. He speaks a certain way. Because I think there's something in the human psyche to where everyone can tell you a certain thing, but after you hear it so many times, I feel like it becomes diluted to you. And then your heart will try and, if one thing is said in a certain way, you will draw towards it. So I see how that could possibly happen. But that's why it says in the Bible that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Because no matter which way you go, the heart can only take you so far. Because there is a block when it comes to feelings. Like, whenever Dorian was talking to Henry this entire time, it was almost like he was only following him because he was different. Which is why I blame Henry. Because Henry is older than him. He's probably 2 times older than him. He knows how impressionable he is. And Henry's whole shtick, his whole thing was being a contrarian. Like, there's many times in the book where Henry would say something to either Basil or Dorian, then later in the book, contradict that entire thing, but both of them sound so philosophical and it's articulated so well to where they both are believed. Not by Henry, but by people that he's speaking to. Like, I don't think there's one instance in the book to where Henry would say something and he would stick to it the entire book with no kind of contradictions at all. I think it was written that way on purpose, which is why Oscar Wilde, where he's so good. But he'll say one thing for like a paragraph, of dialogue to Dorian. And it's so philosophical, it's so well worded. Like, the way he had such a way with words to, it could appeal to someone younger. He would switch how he's talking, if it was like to Dorian or the round table or his wife. He knew what he was doing. He was very smart, very meticulous, but he's so deceitful. It was condescending what he was doing. But all that to say, Dorian came to Henry for advice about a girl that he saw in the theater that he enjoyed. I think he had just seen her do Romeo and Juliet. And Henry gave him this almost standoffish thing of saying, like, love is worthless. There's no need, like, you're beautiful. Why do you need someone else? But what's he saying to him? Like, I was like, bro, you just want to say something. You just want to talk. Like, you just want to say something. But once again, another crazy part, whenever, and this is later on in the book, not too far from what I was talking about in the beginning of this video, but like a good ways, probably like 20 pages or so. But even still, when Henry said that, it wasn't like Dorian agreed instantly. He was almost like, what do you mean? Like, there was something in Dorian fighting. It was something in him was saying, like, okay, I see, like, he's very well worded, but what he's saying is just, he's just a contrarian. He's trying to say something. But once again, Dorian was still young and impressionable. And at this point in his life, there's no one else in his life giving him any negative reinforcement. Or wouldn't even be negative, just something contradictory to what everyone else is telling him. Henry's still the only one being the seed of doubt in his life. Everything's good in his life. Everyone says he's beautiful. A young aristocrat in London, 19th century. Like, he has the whole world in his hands. He meets a girl at the theater. Like, all this just great stuff going on. He talks to this one man that he looks up to and tells him a seed of doubt. Now this whole world is, like, amplified. It's kind of like in my head, if you think of, like, let's say, like, you have, like, a white circle. And that white circle resembles the pure things everyone's saying to you and all the good things everyone's saying to you. And you put, like, a black dot just, like, somewhere in the middle. Whenever you see that entire thing in the grand scheme, when you see the white circle, you will instantly just look at that black dot. And I think that's what Henry was in Dorian's life. Because everyone was telling him all this white. Everyone was telling him all this good stuff. And whenever he looked at it in his psyche, like in his mind, in the grand scheme, he would see that one black dot and instantly draw and, like, drill onto that. So now whenever he looks into his real life, which leads me to say when he goes to see Sybil for I think the 4th or 5th time he goes to see Sybil, and Sybil has a bad performance, it's like he's trying to find what to do. It's like he went to his reservoir in his head of, like, okay, what do I do in this situation? And he instantly pulls out the folder of what Henry said. And it made it worse that he invited Henry and Basil to go see Sybil, and then Henry and Basil are sitting there with Dorian watching Sybil give a bad performance. Imagine Dorian having to go through, like, he's watching a girl that he's very attracted to her. He's almost in love with her without even speaking to her for too long. The person that he looks up to is right on his left that's giving him seeds of doubt. And he's probably looking back at him every few scenes like, man, like, it's not going good. I know what he's going to say. I'm not even going to ask him. And the one time Henry could have been the good side or tried to say something good to Dorian to kind of reassure him, he just walks away. I'm pretty sure after that scene in the theater, Dorian and Henry don't speak about what happened. Basil and Henry just walk away. Dorian goes to see Sybil, and that's when we get, oh my gosh, probably one of the saddest parts of the book. I'm not even gonna, matter of fact, I am spoiling it. I'm sorry for spoiling the book, but I cannot talk about this book without, like, getting enthusiastic about it. Because, like, it's just so good. It's just so good. But I have to talk about it. Like, justice for Sybil. I felt so, when I was reading it, once again, you gotta remember that I've never read, this is my first book that I read on my classic literature journey. So when I was reading it, I've never seen writing this emotional in my entire life. Outside of the small excerpts I read from, like, Maya Angelou when I was younger, I had read a lot of, like, black literature because my aunt's a poet. So, like, she had always given me, like, small, like, Malcolm X stuff to read. Stuff that was very driven, powerful stuff, but never something like this. Like, I was seeing this man Dorian just rip into Sybil, like, saying, like you're worthless. I only loved you because you were very good at theater. I'm a fan of the arts, and you were a part of the arts, and you had this bad performance. Now I don't like you. And then Sybil, but this man Dorian, man. But this is where a big part of the book happens. A big part of the book. So after Sybil does what she does, justice for Sybil, this is the first time in the book where Dorian knowingly did something bad, and he knows that his sins don't reflect on him anymore, so he doesn't feel it physically. Like, he won't feel like, man, I did something wrong, but mentally, he knows what he did was wrong. So he instantly goes back to his house, and he sees the painting, but, like, he opens the closet where, I think it's either a closet or a dresser, I forgot. But he sees the painting for the first time and sees that it's, like, not as pretty as it was before. But I was like, oh, but he sees that it's not as pristine or perfect as it was before, and he sees there's something uglier about it. Something has deranged the painting a little bit. And this is a point in the book when he realizes that, or fully realizes that deal that he made with the devil or the universe or whatever you believe he made a deal with, that is actually true and it's actually happening. He realizes that him exclaiming that to the universe, it truly happened, and he'll no longer age. So that's why I say he didn't feel what he did was wrong, but he knew it. He knew what he did was wrong. But you got to think about what that would do to someone. He didn't feel it too much physically, but he just knew it was wrong. And he knew that if anyone else sees him, they're not going to see the sin on him at all either. They'll see him as the young aristocrat, the young Dorian that they've always loved. So how that could skew his psyche is that from then on, he probably was doing all these bad things because he knew he could get away with it. And the only thing that would stop him from doing that would have to be good morals. Like, that's his only mental block for the rest of the book. Like, his only thing that could be the saving grace, the only thing that could stop him, there's two things actually. The first thing would be him developing good morals because he realized what he's doing is wrong, and something in him decides to become a better person. It was either that, or I believe Henry had so much drive over him, so much power over him when it comes to what he was saying, that Henry could have said, yo, Dorian, what you're doing is wrong, and he would have stopped. And I think Henry knew that too, and he didn't do it. Henry knew the power he had over Dorian, bro. Like, I believe that wholeheartedly. If he didn't truly know the power he had over him, he wouldn't have spoke to him the way he did. Like, every time he spoke to Dorian, it was almost like an auditory version of a manifesto. It was almost like he saw Dorian as, okay, I have power over you, and I'm bored. I don't have a job. My wife doesn't really like me. I argue with my wife all the time. I'm going to take all my views, and I'm going to test out these philosophical ideas I have on this young, impressionable kid and see what happens. That's what it felt like. When you read it, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's not like if you just read it surface level, you just see, like, maybe just talking to talk, but, like, it's the way it's worded that it was almost like he was directing stuff to him to see if it'll work. And I think that's backed up because later in the book, he'll talk about the same topic. Let's say there's a topic on page 50 and a topic on page 150. It'll be the same topic, two completely different ideas that contradict each other. That's why I know it was just him testing Dorian. All Henry's fault, bro. It's like, bro, I believe the whole thing was Henry's fault. I also really like James's character. James was Sybil's brother. And James from the beginning knew something was off with Dorian, which is like, I think that was like brotherly instinct. And then James's whole story throughout the book, it's kind of like pocketed throughout the book. It's not like one continuous story like Sybil's was or Dorian's or Henry's was. He'll like pop in every once in a while and you can connect the pieces of what James was doing in the meantime. But his story is super cool. You'll love James's story if you read this book. He's one of the better scenes in the entire book. It's later on in the book. This is way down the line of like Dorian's done so much bad at this point, and then they're like in some house and they're doing like drugs. Well, he wasn't, but they were all kind of there, just around this house. And he meets Dorian after this long time of after what happened with Sybil. His sister had literally been gone for this amount of time. He was about to go off to the military. He had one thing left to do in London, and he meets Dorian for the first time since then. They called him Prince Charming, and that's what he referred to Dorian as, like, yo, you're Prince Charming, right? That meeting for the first time, I was like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? I was locked in. Another scene I liked was Basil and Dorian later on in the book. That was a crazy one. So at this point, Dorian's done so much wrong, so much bad stuff, and to me, I think it's because there was not a visual or a physical representation of his sins. It was all in his mind, and no one can see that. It was only him. So he was just doing bad stuff because he had bad morals. His morals and his moral compass could not stop him from doing bad stuff because he only cared about what other people said to him. Like, his reliance on everyone else's opinions of him made it seem to where if they can't see any bad on me, nothing I do is bad. And only he knew where the sins were going. Only he knew where the ill will would go. And then Basil, which is the guy that painted the picture in the first place, and the one that's probably the most fond of Dorian out of the entire book. Even to this point in the book, after all this bad stuff, there was something in Basil that just loved Dorian. Ah, man, I love Basil's character so much. Especially, I watched the movie as well. Basil's character in the movie was great. But at this point, Basil is about to leave off, I think, for Paris, I think. I forgot exactly where he was going. But him and Dorian passed each other on the street. They talk for a little bit. They go back to Dorian's house. Dorian and Basil, this conversation is probably one of the best written conversations I've seen in literature at all. Like, when I was reading it, like I felt like on the edge of my seat, knowing, because Basil doesn't know that the sins are reflected on the painting, but Dorian does. So it's almost like when you're reading it, you see the weight of the conversation shifting to Dorian's side because Dorian has the leverage here. Leverage is not the good word because it wasn't like they were arguing until like later on. But it was like a visual representation of the conversation in my head, and I was seeing like the weight shift to Dorian's side because he knew more than Basil did. So Basil would ask him questions that seems like he's targeting Dorian with the questions, but it's only targeting him because of what Dorian knows. Basil would ask a seemingly innocent question about like, so I've been hearing all this bad stuff you're doing, like, why are you doing stuff like why are you doing stuff like this? Like, through a series of questions in simplified terms, that's what he would kind of ask Dorian. And the reason why that question would be so powerful was because Dorian, the Dorian and the reader, we both know that he's only doing that because the sins reflect on the painting. So that question is like, it's a wholesome, genuine question Basil's asking. He's asking, why are you doing this? But how I read it, I think Dorian took it as like, does he know something that I don't? He was like paranoid because Basil's the one that painted the painting. So it was almost like he was questioning if Basil knew already. It was like, do you know? Is that why you're asking me? Do you know why I'm doing this? That conversation to me was such a chess game. And I was like, yo, this is beautiful writing right here. But that conversation ends with Dorian telling Basil, like, you want to see why I'm doing this? Follow me. And they walk up to the painting. Oh my gosh. Bro, when they walk up to the painting, bro, Dorian's like, you want to see why I'm doing this? It's your creation. He flips off the mat and he sees the painting, and at this point the painting's like, it's like gruesomely ugly. Like, it's like this, he's done so much bad, and it's like, and the last time that we really see what the painting looked like in description was Sybil. So like probably 200 pages before this. This is the only time we see it after that. And at this point it's like mangled. Like, it's like a terrible, ugly painting. And a really cool part this part was so cool to me. But it was like based on like a discernment kind of feeling, and he instantly knew what that meant. Like, he looks at Dorian and he's like, what have you done? And if you're just reading it without kind of like critically thinking, you would just think he means like, did you like mess up my painting? But no, I think Basil truly knew, like, something sparked in him because he had heard all these bad stories about what Dorian had done in his life up to this point. Like, I think it was like a cognitive realization of like, yo, I know what this is. Like, what have you done? Like, why is it your sins corrupted this so much? And then we get probably the craziest part of the entire book. Writing wise and plot wise, it's probably one of the climaxes. But he gets Basil out of there, and that was probably one of the saddest parts of the book, because Basil was probably my favorite character, like written wise. I think he had such a genuine love for Dorian, and he wanted to see him do well. And it was worse because Henry was his friend, so he realized what Henry had done. Like every time Henry would talk and Basil was there, Basil would be like, "Stop, Henry!" Like being like the angel and devil on the shoulder for Dorian. Like, and it's just unfortunate that Dorian chose the devil over Basil multiple times throughout the book. But I'm telling you, there's so many crazy parts in this book. But that leads to, there was someone named Alan later on in the book who has a lot of like mystique and kind of questions about him. But Alan is a chemist, and we learn, I think in like chapter maybe 10 or so, I think it's before 11, because chapter 11 is terrible. Skip that chapter. But I think it's before this. I don't fully know. It was a minute since I read this book. But we learned that one of the people's lives that Dorian had ruined in this tear that he was on of just terrible things was Alan's life. I think Basil says that. After Dorian had got rid of Basil, he was talking with Alan, because Alan's a chemist and old friends. He was like, my old friend will come help me get rid of the body. And then Alan's like, why would I do that? You ruined my life. So for this probably like half this chapter, not that much, probably like a quarter of the chapter, he's telling Dorian, why would I do that? And Dorian's trying to convince him as to why he should. And then once Dorian realizes that Alan's not going to help him, he does one of the most mystique-driven guys questions of the entire book. But he gets a piece of paper and writes on it. He writes something on the paper. We don't know. It doesn't say it in the book. But he like slides it over to Alan. Alan reads it and then agrees to do what Dorian said. After this brief sidebar, I went to Reddit, Quora, Google. I was asking I was like, yo, what did he say to Alan to get him to agree? Because if you read it, like, you'll see how staunch and how staunch and stubborn Alan was to not helping Dorian, because Dorian ruined his life. So it was almost like a 3-sentence span of him being completely no to this paper happening, and then him saying yes. And the reason that's so powerful is because after Dorian had killed Basil, it says that Dorian, like, he couldn't even look at Basil's body. Like, every time you see it, he would like wince and have to look away, which implies that he wasn't gonna move the body, which implies then he was gonna get caught. And at this point, while I'm reading it, I was Team Dorian until like page 60. After that, I was like, bro, I hope he gets caught. So in that segment, I was like, bro, like, yes, okay, this is how the book's gonna end. He's gonna get caught for killing Basil. Like, that's how it's gonna end. And then when Alan was saying he's not gonna help him, I was like, okay, now he's definitely gonna get caught. But Alan being a pawn for Dorian and getting rid of the body for him, like, that to me, that was like, bro, okay, he's never gonna get caught. Like, he'll never face the consequences for his actions. What did he say to Alan? What did he say to him? I don't know to this day, and it haunts me every day. I've seen some people, because like, a lot of people think that this book is like, kind of like gay coded a little bit, and they think that Alan was gay and Dorian had like threatened to out him. That makes sense, honestly. It makes sense, but like, it eats away at me that I don't know for sure, because that's such a pivotal moment in the book, but it doesn't seem like it. Like, I feel like people that have read this book and talk about it, they skip over this part, and I'm like, yo, he was gonna get caught. He would have got caught if he didn't blackmail Alan to help him. Justice for Alan too. Justice for Alan, Sybil, and Basil. Like, at this point, I was so ready for him to get caught for just have consequences for his actions, because he had ruined so many people's lives. He had turned away from the angel on his shoulder. He had chose completely what Lord Henry would say. No, I think something in Dorian knew that Henry was just talking just to talk. Because I told you in the beginning of the book, whenever Henry would say something, Dorian would just like, he'd be like, why? I don't believe that. And then later on, he would turn to what Henry would say. So he knew, bro. I was like, you're consciously choosing to be immoral, and you're not getting consequence for it. And like, I hated that. But skipping to the final thing I want to touch on, at least for plot points in the book, is the last chapter. Oh my gosh, bro, I get really enthusiastic about this book. Like, I don't usually like get up and move in my videos at all. I kind of just talk, but like, yo, to me, this book is like, it's just so powerful. I think it's a must read for everybody. And I said last chapter, but I really meant like the last few paragraphs. But I really want to leave this question to the people that have read the book. But essentially, Dorian, he does something bad and he runs back to the painting because he's like, I'm done, like, I've had it. And he's running to the painting, and there's like a cognitive dissonance type of moment to where it's almost like he wants to stop what he's doing, but he doesn't. Like, it was almost like a fight in his head of like, should I stop, should I not stop? And it was like small glimpses of like hope and glimmers of of morality in him. And he was saying, like, I have to stop doing this stuff. Like he was like, I killed my best friend, I killed Sybil. Like, all this is just racing through his head, and he's running towards this painting. And then he gets up to the painting, takes off the tarp, obviously, and sees how mangled and disgusting the painting is. And one of the biggest parts of the book to me, because remember I just said that he was having good morals in his head? It was almost like the darkness that was in him reconsumed him after all that light had just glimmered. And then he, like, it was almost like a paragraph span of like him saying all this morality, good, morally right stuff, to him saying, but why would I stop? And then two vital questions pop up into his head in this moment. And those two are, the first one is, should I let this haunting of me killing my best friend or killing Basil haunt me for the rest of my life? And he was like, no. And then he was like, should I confess? And he was like, never. And then after the no and the never appear in his head, and he's like, there's only one thing I can do. And he tries to destroy the only evidence that would show him being sinful. The one thing in the entire book that reflects all the bad he's doing, because no one can see it on him. So if he gets rid of the painting, he'll never get caught. Because Basil's body is gone. Even though Dorian's image or public appeal was tarnished by this point, because everyone was talking about him, Dorian's like a recluse at this point. But he's still, he's like beautiful still. He looks like as young as he was 18, because he doesn't age, remember? So he looks as beautiful as he was when he was younger. No one in their right mind would question him in public, really. So if there's no body, there's no painting, and no one's gonna question it, he'll get away with it. So he decides he's gonna get rid of the painting. He gets a knife that he used to kill Basil, which is amazing writing. I love that. And he goes to stab the painting. And the ending is left ambiguous, but it says that people had came up, because after he stabbed the painting, we don't know what happens after that, technically. People come up and they talk to the police officers that were there and say, who's in here, like who, what happened? And they said, Mr. Dorian Gray. So what happened was they found Dorian dead. Oh my gosh, like when I was reading it, like I was like, did he kill himself? Did he stab the painting? Is the painting a reflection of him? Like physically, like he stabbed the painting, would he kill himself? So many questions pop up, like a question like, was him deciding to kill the painting? Like the willful intent to kill the painting? Was that him breaking the deal with the devil? Like did the devil kill him for trying to break the deal? Or like did he really just stab himself and the writing was basically trying to make it seem like he stabbed the painting because the painting is him? So was it like him killing the painting was really just a metaphor or a figurative for him killing himself? Like to this day I don't know exactly what happened, but like I understand conceptually what happened, and like eventually like he came to the end of his line. He had to end somehow. Because I knew he wasn't going to get away with it. I knew like how the book was going around like chapter 20, that he had to die somehow. I thought it was going to be James, but it wasn't James. And it's almost like it's poetic that he ended himself. It's almost like him killing himself was fulfilling a prophecy, kind of. Like he thought destroying the painting would set him free from the sins that he had to see and that he thought other people could see. Like him destroying the painting, he thought that would set him free from the sins that he was shackled to with this painting. But that ended up being the death of him. It's almost like Oedipus in like the plays of how Oedipus, like he had a prophecy that he was going to marry his mom and kill his father. So he goes to the opposite side of the world to like escape this prophecy. And somehow I'm skipping a lot of parts, but somehow he ends up at the end of it killing his father and marrying his mom. Like him trying to run from what was destined for him ended up fulfilling the prophecy. So it's kind of like with Dorian, that he thought escaping his sins was destroying the painting, was destroying this physical representation of his sins. But I think it's ironic because your sins and what you do morally is what makes up your psyche. Him destroying the painting was destroying himself. Because once again, all the stuff he was doing bad, he was still choosing to do it. It wasn't like he was compelled by the devil or whoever he was cursed to. He still had the choice, the free will to choose the bad things he was doing. Like we can't forget, everything he did is what made the painting ugly. And your choices make up who you are. So him trying to destroy this physical representation of the choices he made is him destroying the physical representation of who he was. And it's just beautifully told because it just shows that you cannot run from the choices you make. Like this book is actually amazing. And it reminded me of another story. It reminded me of Narcissus from Greek mythology. So I'm probably one of the biggest Greek mythology fans like ever, maybe. And probably in like my top 10 favorite stories ever, Narcissus and Echo is probably maybe 8 or 9 or so. The top 3 are probably like all Athena stuff, but regardless. So just an overview of the story, just like I want to get into a little bit. So Zeus is away cheating on his wife, Hera, which is, I mean, normal in Greek mythology. He's having an affair with nymphs. And there's one nymph named Echo she was like great storytelling, great wordsmith, very good orator. And she was distracting Hera with these stories and telling all these stories. But Zeus slipped up somehow and Hera got wind of him cheating. So because she's still Hera and he's still Zeus, she didn't have the power to stop Zeus from cheating. So she punishes Echo instead, which is a common thing in Greek mythology. Like Hera will, it's crazy that she's the goddess of marriage and like fertility and stuff in that realm. And her husband cheats all the time and she punishes the girls. Like, it's just crazy stuff. But all that to say, Echo was such a great speaker that Hera's curse to her was that Echo could only repeat the last word or the last phrase of what someone else said. Hence the word Echo. But skipping ahead a little bit, she becomes undesirable and she's walking in the woods one day. And she sees this beautiful man named Narcissus, who's I think he's like Archer, or he's like hunting something. Now Narcissus, who is the focal point of this story and who I want to tie back to Dorian, but there was a prophecy when he was younger, and the prophecy said about him that he would grow up to be this great man until he realizes who he is. And no one knew what that meant, but it was like, okay, we'll figure it out. But Narcissus goes through his whole life like being a heartbreaker, honestly. Like a lot of girls try and be with him. He denies them all. He wants to be just with himself. Like he's just very, he's like the sparker of unrequited love. Because he won't allow himself to love anybody else. Like he always lived life solo. But skipping ahead, Echo sees Narcissus. And while Narcissus is hunting, he realizes somebody's following him. And he says, "Who are you?" But Echo wants to talk to him but can't really speak. So she repeats the last word he said, which is "you." And she's saying you over and over again. And Narcissus is saying like, "Go get away from me. Like, what are you doing?" And he lashes out on Echo and says like, "I would never love you." Like, just being really brutal to her, which is reminiscent of how Dorian was talking to Sybil, which is a crazy parallel. But Echo takes that so hard and she repeats over and over again, "Love you, love you, love you," which is so sad. That story is so sad. But Echo then walks into a cave and sits for the rest of her life and never moves again. And it's said that the cave like absorbed her voice from her and Echo just withered away into the cave. And that's why when you go into caves now, or at least in Greek mythology, whenever you speak, it's Echo speaking back to you. Whenever you say something, that's what echoes into the cave. I love how Greek mythology has like stories for all the small stuff like that in life. But the story is not over. So there's another man named Arminus. Now Arminus is very, very in love with Narcissus. And once again, Narcissus cannot love anybody else. So Narcissus tells Arminus like, "I don't want to be with you, go away." And Arminus goes to the god of revenge, or the goddess of revenge. Her name is Nemesis. And Arminus pleads to Nemesis and says, "Can you make Narcissus feel how everyone else is feeling about him whenever he denies us? Like, can you get revenge for me?" Nemesis agrees and leads Narcissus to a clear pond of the clearest water possible. So Narcissus is walking by after hunting and sees this beautiful pond with the most beautiful water. He goes over to get a drink and he looks down and he sees the most beautiful man there is. The one man that he saw that he ever felt true love for. And every time he would go to give the man a kiss, the man would come up to him. Every time he would reach out his hand for the man, the hand would come up to him. But every time he would try and grab the man or like hold the man, it would disappear. So obviously the man he's seeing is his reflection. So he was seeing his reflection and in love with it. And it said that he stayed there for the rest of his life, leaning over this pond, and he turned into flowers that leaned over the pond. He like withered away the same way Echo withered away into the cave. He withered away into these flowers that leaned over the pond, which is where we get the Narcissus flower that leans over ponds and leans over water surfaces. But that story to me reminded me so much of Dorian Gray, or vice versa. And the one thing that really, really gave me that parallel was that prophecy that they had Narcissus for. The prophecy was he'll be great until he figures out who he is, or until he sees who he is. The same way in Dorian Gray that he was good. He was a perfectly fine man for 18 years until he realized who he was, which is synonymous of Lord Henry telling him that your youth is all you have. So for Dorian, Lord Henry put up that mirror for him whenever Henry was telling Dorian that youth is all you have, this marvelous thing you have is the only thing that matters in life. That put up a metaphorical mirror of him seeing himself, him really having to look at himself and saying, is this all that matters? The same way in the story of Narcissus, that mirror was the water. Him seeing himself, him seeing his reflection, was him realizing who he was and that this is all that mattered. So both of them came to terms with all that matters was myself. Such a good contrast. Like I was reading it and I was seeing the parallels in my head. I would not be surprised if the story Narcissus inspired Oscar Wilde at least a little bit for this story. That's such a good Greek mythology story. I might do a video of like my top 10 favorite Greek mythology stories. Like there's so many good ones. Another brief tangent I want to have. Oh, once again, sorry for the sporadic nature of this video. Like I just like talking about stuff like this. But I read The Bluest by Toni Morrison, and it was a cool contrast in that book, almost kind of like opposite of Dorian. So Dorian's thing was that everyone around him was bigging him up to be this perfect person. But in the Bluest Eye, it was the complete opposite. And everyone was telling Pecola that she wasn't this beautiful person. And it shows the ultimate detriment of both of those things. Like in the Bluest Eye, everyone is telling her all this bad stuff. It leads Pecola down this spiral of, I'm not good enough. People will try and tell her good things, but at that point it's too late. People will try and not big her up, but try and kind of console her. And at that point, she's too far gone. Like, she's been drilled down by this system that has black women or little black girls as inferior or uglier than the white girl. She would wake up and see white dolls with blue eyes. She would see Shirley Temple, and she would see the sun being bred with the girl with blue eyes. And all she saw was blue eyes and white skin her entire life. She felt inferior in her society. There was a time in the book whenever she went to the corner store, and there was this man that was selling, I think, candies. And it said that whenever Pecola looked up at him, she felt smaller than him, but it wasn't talking about with stature. It wasn't talking about physically. It was saying that she felt inferior to him mentally. Like, she would look up to him and she felt smaller, like more inferior to him. And the notion that she wasn't good enough and everyone telling her that, it spiraled her to madness at the end of the book. And the reason why that contrast is because with Dorian, you would think the opposite would happen. But they both ended up in terrible outcomes because everyone around Dorian was telling him all this good stuff about him. And the mentality Pecola had of I'm not good enough spiraling her, Dorian's spiral was, I gotta keep up this good that I have. Everything he did was trying to keep this image of like, all I care about is what other people say about me. So I'm gonna make sure that I can't be seen with any sins or moral injustice on me. No one can see it on me. Only I will know that I'm doing all these bad things. And this notion, this spiral that he's having of I gotta keep up this good, leads to the final question, the final most important question of the entire book, is that should I get rid of this painting because it's the only thing that anyone can ever find of all these sins that I'm doing? And he ends up killing himself over this terrible notion that he had of I gotta keep up this vain, pompous, arrogant type of mentality, this hedonistic lifestyle I'm living. I have to keep it up to where no one can see any bad. All they see is this beautiful man that I am. So it's different in Spiral, in what made them spiral, but it's the same with the virtue of needing, the virtue of wanting. Pecola wanted to have blue eyes. She wanted to be beautiful. Dorian wanted to keep his beauty. He wanted to keep his public image. And both of them were so steadfast, so stubborn into this wanting that they both was one led to madness and one killed themselves. And that was so beautiful when I realized it. Like, I had read Bluest Eye like 3 or 4 books after Dorian Gray. I don't know what the time span was, but I noticed that like I've seen this drive of wanting something before. Both of them had the same theme of identity and this theme of vanity to a certain extent. And I saw like that need, that spiral for wanting something. I was like, I've seen this in Dorian before. I knew it instantly. But the last thing I really wanted to talk about was how we all kind of have a Dorian painting in our heads. Because we think about it, we take out all of the metaphors and all of the symbolic and figurative stuff in Dorian Gray. If we look at it in reality, no one else in real life can see sins on you. They can't see all the bad you've done. But you can, and you have a symbolic Dorian Gray picture in your head 24/7 throughout the day. Like, some people are really good because their moral compass drives them away. They want to have a good painting in their head. But some people, which I've literally seen, some people will take the notion that Dorian had of, I care about what other people say so much about me to where if they can't see sins on me, sins don't exist. And they'll do these things that are ill intent or just immoral in general, and all their excuse for it is like, now they don't say this because they can't just say this excuse, but I feel like in their heads the excuse would be, no one knows that I did this, so it's okay. It's almost like the ultimate theme of integrity, like doing the right thing when no one's watching. Like, I think all classic lit books have something you can take out of it, and Dorian Gray definitely has a lot of themes of integrity, morality, vanity, like there's so much you can pull from this book. But just more technical stuff, I love the writing style in this book. It was super flowery, almost like I think I said it in my last video, but I see writers in different ways. I think some writers have a more abstract painter type of style, and some have a more pencil drawing type of style. Not saying one or the other is better, because a pencil drawing at a 10 out of 10 is the same as a painting at a 10 out of 10. They're both beautiful in different ways. It just takes different ways to get there. And Oscar is the absolute pinnacle, the peak, probably the poster child for flowery, abstract, painter type of writing styles. The only person I would even put close to him is Tolstoy, or maybe Ray Bradbury sometimes, even though I don't think he's as good. Bradbury, Tolstoy, and Wilde are probably the three that I could give you right now that are just, they're so super flowery, they describe everything so well. But I think Oscar Wilde's probably the best at it. Pencil drawers to me would be more of the Kafkas, the Morrisons, even like a lot of philosophers maybe, even though they don't really have a prose, but very meticulous writing styles. It's like no words are wasted. Everything means a certain word. A lot of Kafka's sentences are like 4 or 5 words. A lot of Morrison sentences they'll probably be like 10 sentences in like one paragraph, but the paragraph's like this small. Like it's like super punchy, super to the point because they're not missing any words. With Oscar Wilde or Tolstoy, there'll be like a paragraph that takes up half the page and it's like describing one thing. And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people don't like the more Victorian type of writing style, at least for Oscar Wilde. But like, I loved reading that. Like it reminds me of an artist like Kendrick Lamar, who's much more of a pencil drawer when it comes to making music, versus like a Kanye or a Tyler the Creator or someone in that realm, to where they can. It's not, I don't like using the word waste, but I don't know what other word I would use. Because like Tolstoy or Oscar Wilde, they'll waste words a little bit, but it all comes together at the end. Like the same way a painter can be loose with how he is. Like he can afford to kind of misstep or be sloppy here, because painting will just go over it and it'll cover up and end up beautiful. It's just different forms of visual arts. But a Kanye, he'll like waste songs or waste segments in songs or like different verses because the entire song is beautiful. But a Kendrick, every verse, every line, every word is meticulous. You're not missing anything. Both beautiful. Like I'm the biggest Kanye fan ever. I don't want to make it seem like people on this side are worse than the potential drawers because they're less meticulous. I think they're both beautiful and 10 out of 10 at their peaks. Like Kanye's probably my favorite person to ever live. Like I love Kanye. But like for example, a song like Runaway, which is probably one of the greatest songs ever made. There's sections in the song to where he's literally just mumbling. Like it's like he's not saying words, but it sounds so good. Or the entire outro, the 2-minute outro where it's like a distorted voice that you can't even make out. Like stuff like that is just, he's sacrificing that section of the song for the song itself. But if you play a song like You or Blacker the Berry or a lot of stuff about Good Kid, Mad City, like even Shireen, the intro, definitely Sing About Me Dying of Thirst, Art of Peer Pressure. These songs, every word is like, you cannot miss anything at all. This is perfect stuff right here. And I think there's that distinction, that parallel with art in general. Like if you want to get into like with fashion, like Rick Owens and Pharrell would definitely be more on the abstract side. He'll sacrifice some pieces, or he'll not really sacrifice pieces or waste pieces, but for the entirety of the line, there'll be some pieces that feel like fillers. Or like Rick Owens is much more like meticulous. Or like if you want to go into like movies, Scorsese and Christopher Nolan. Like it's very completely different. One is more abstract and one is more meticulous. Like it's very, to me, I see stuff like that whenever I'm looking at art, because like I look at art I just think it's such a powerful like method that humans have of expressing themselves. Like I think art's the only way humans can express themselves. So I think we have to look at art way more serious than we do. It's beautiful to me. But all that to say, I just went on a crazy tangent, but I absolutely love the writing style in this. And the very last thing I'm going to talk about is how I've been ragging on Henry a lot in this video. But I have to give him the props of, I didn't like what he was saying, and I rarely agreed with it, but I love how he was speaking. And I remember the reason why I love philosophy so much now, the reason why that's 80% of my reads probably every month, it's only because of how Dorian was speaking. Not Dorian, Henry. And I had to find books or like people, writers, philosophers, thinkers that spoke the way he did in this book for an entire book. Which led me to, initially I got Stranger, Fall, and Myth of Sisyphus all in one day. Got The Republic by Plato, which led me to get Will to Power, Nietzsche, Break of Tragedy. I got some Descartes. I got all those philosophers I read now simply because of Lord Henry from this book. So I hate the character, never really agreed with them, but I have to give him props for how he was speaking. So I gotta give him props there, even though I think the entire book is his fault and I don't like him. But I feel like I'm way off of what this video was supposed to be. I don't even know what I'm gonna title this video, honestly, but I think I'm gonna wrap it up now. But thank you so much for watching this video. Please read Dorian Gray. I know I spoiled a lot of it. I hope that if you got to this part, you skipped some stuff if you wanted to read it. I'm sorry about that. But this book changed my life, actually. And I feel like if I was going to do any book to start off the reviews for my account, it had to be this one. This is the exact copy that I read from. And like, I want to frame it, honestly. I want to put it somewhere like you can't really see it. You can't see it at all. I know you can't. But I have a lot of books now, and I read all the time. But there's always going to be a special place in my heart for this one. Like, oh man, this right here, this is the one. And I also just picked up Oscar Wilde's plays because I know he didn't have any more novels, but I had to find something else from him because I loved how he was writing. It was beautiful stuff. So I got this. Haven't started reading it yet. I'm gonna read it. I don't think I have it on my list for 2025 at all. Actually, dang, I think I missed that in my video. But I am probably gonna read this. I don't know when. I have a lot of reads I want to read before then, but I have to read it eventually. Just because like. Oscar Wilde to me, just off of Dorian Gray, he's a masterclass writer, man. But if you want to join the book club, it's in the caption. If you want to follow my Instagram, I'll greatly appreciate doing both of those. But that is all I got. Love you for watching this video. If you want to read it, please read it. Please talk to me about it. DM me, message me, let's talk. Enjoy yourself. Take only what you need from. Alright, so I don't know if I'm gonna put this part in the video. It's the next, I think it's like 2-3 days after I recorded the initial part. But I forgot to mention one of the coolest parts of the book, and it's not even in the actual book. It's the preface to this, and Oscar Wilde kind of writes like an aesthetic manifesto, kind of like what he sees art as and how it should be perceived in the world when it leaves the artist's hands. And I do want to give my thoughts on it, but I feel like I don't want to just put it up for you guys to read, so I'm going to read it to you. It's not too long, I'm not that fast of a reader, so it might take like, I don't know how long it's going to take, but it really shouldn't take that long. But I will give my thoughts after I read it. Alright, so this is the preface to A Picture of Dorian Gray. The artist is the creator of beautiful things. To reveal art and conceal the artist is the artist's aim. The critic is he who can translate into another manner or a new material his impression of beautiful things. The highest as the lowest form of criticism is a mode of autobiography. Those who can find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. This is a fault. Those who find beautiful meanings in beautiful things are the cultivated. For these there is hope. They are the elect to whom beautiful things mean only beauty. There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all. The 19th century dislike of realism is the rage of Caliban seeing his own face in a glass. The 19th century dislike of romanticism is the rage of Caliban not seeing his own face in a glass. The moral life of man forms part of the subject matter of the artist, but the morality of art consists in the perfect use of an imperfect medium. No artist desires to prove anything. Even things that are true can be proved. No artist has ethical sympathies. An ethical sympathy in an artist is an unpardonable mannerism of style. No artist is ever morbid. The artist can express everything. Thought and language are to the artist instruments of an art. Vice and virtue are to the artist materials for an art. From the point of view of form, the type of all the arts is the art of the musician. From the point of view of feeling, the actor's craft is the type. All art is at once surface and symbol. Those who go beneath the surface do so at their peril. Those who read the symbol do so at their peril. It is a spectator and not life that art really mirrors. Diversity of opinion about a work of art shows that the work is new, complex, and vital. When critics disagree, the artist is in accord with himself. We can forgive a man for making a useful thing as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. All art is quite useless. Now when I first read that, I was completely blown away by it. I was like, that is the most profound way I've ever seen anyone talk about art. And something inside of me, I've always known art is much more than just a painting, a movie, a book. It's something that almost transcends feeling and emotion, because I feel like art is almost an infinite thing. And I'm not saying the art we make necessarily is infinite, because I don't think it is. I think we're finite beings that can create other finite things. But I do think there's something infinite about art, and I think it's what we're drawing from. I think the emotions, the concepts, the feeling, the virtue that the artist has to go into to get the art themselves, conceptualize it in their head, and then make it, that process itself is diving into the infinite and trying to make it finite. There's something infinite about art, and it's so beautiful to me when I think about it. I've almost got emotional sometimes thinking about what art really is. And I want to make a whole video about it. It might be a long video though, because I have so much to say about just art in general and what it really, because you can tell by what I'm surrounded by. I talk about books, there's all kind of art behind me, I just love it so much, and I know it's something else in it. Every time I read a new book or see a movie, or every time I do anything around art, I always feel there's something more here. But I do want to dive into what Oscar was saying. So he says to reveal art and conceal the artist is the art's aim. So when I first read that, I instantly agreed, because I do feel there's a distinct line between the artist and the art. Now that line is blended conceptually because obviously the art is a reflection or an expansion of the artist. But the reason why it's interesting to me that I think there's a obvious distinction there is because the critic himself or herself, whoever the critic is doing art themselves by interpreting what the art is. And that's why I always ask people all the time what their opinions are. Whenever I read or go to see the movies or see paintings and I'm with other people and talk about other people, I'm so very keen on what I'm asking them about what they're interpreting from the art, because I feel like what they say about the art, it says more about them than it does the art. And that's why I think it was so powerful when he said, those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. This is a fault. And then he says, those who find beautiful meanings in beautiful things are cultivated. For these there is hope. Like, I don't necessarily agree that about the corrupt and cultivated things. I feel like that he was just being poetic with the writing. But I do see what he's getting at. Because if you can see something that's extrinsically beautiful, because obviously beauty is a subjective thing, but let's just say conceptually here, if you see something that's beautiful and you can find a way to corrupt it, that says more about you than the art, because the art doesn't change. You have a cognitive, rational mind that you're creating something in your head that's not there. It says more about you than the art. Because if you think about it, if you go back even farther, the artist made it with beautiful intentions, and he made something beautiful conceptually. And then you look at it and find corrupt in it, that says more about you than does the artist or the art. Which is why I think there's a good and bad critic. I think criticism is such a powerful, powerful thing. And it's not just like, people definitely gravely overlook the role of the audience and the critics when it comes to art itself. And I also love when he said, there's so much powerful stuff in this page and a half. He said, there's no such thing as a moral or immoral book. Books are well written or badly written, that is all. And that's something I definitely agree with. That's definitely in my worldview or philosophy about art. Because I definitely think there's not good or bad, or not good or bad. There's definitely good or bad. But there's not immoral or morally wrong in art. Which is a great line. I know that can get maybe some pushback when I say that. But I think it's either well done or badly done, and that's it. At least in the sense that it should be reflected back on the artist. Because I think the critic, it's a valid critique for something to be immoral. You can say that. But I don't think that should take away from the craftsmanship of the art. And I think that's why he says later on the next page, that it is the spectator and not life that the art really mirrors. Like, I'd almost argue that in the totality of what art is when it comes to the artist, the art, and the spectator probably has the most vital position when it comes to just the outlook. Because the artist isn't doing it. A lot of artists would do it for themselves. But to me, if you create art and you don't spread it, it's almost a selfish thing. Now, there is exceptions. Some people make art to for kind of like coping with things, or it helps them get over situations. All that is perfectly understandable when I get that. But if you're creating art with no true reason as to why you're hoarding it and you don't want to spread it, to me, it seems like you're doing the world a disservice. Because art's meant to be interacted with. The critic has way more of a role in the art than the artist does. Millions of people can see what you create. You just have to be out there and let it be seen. Which is why the next two lines is, diversity of opinion about a work of art shows the work is new, complex, and vital. When critics disagree, the artist is in accord with himself. When the critics disagree, the artist is in accord with himself. Like, whenever they're talking about it, the artist was then fine. Like, that's the whole point. It's supposed to be an outward thing. Diversity about what people are talking about, it shows the work is new and vital. If they're talking about it, it means it really hasn't been seen before. Like, in my eyes, the art becomes something almost infinitely bigger than you whenever it leaves your hands. And I don't want to have this segment be too long. And now that I'm talking about it, I kind of want to make a whole video on like art itself and how I see it. At least like really organize and conceptualize my thoughts a little better, because right now I'm kind of just going off the top of my head. I'm reading it and giving thoughts, but I really want to put time and thought into this video because there's something grand, or like there's like magic in art to me. I just love it so much. But the last thing I will say is how he ends this. This is like, oh my gosh, this is perfect writing. So this is like the last little segment. It says, we can forgive a man for making a useless thing as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. All art is quite useless. So what I got from that is like, if we get back up a little bit, when things are made with use, when something is useful, it's made for utility, like a tool, like a hammer or a wrench, or nails, like stuff like that that is made to be useful. If you give too much value into the usefulness, it starts to blend the line between the created being the artist and the utility. Like the person that made the tool, they created something. It's extrinsically, it's still art whenever it's created. But since we give more value to it as being a tool to hammer nails in, it then becomes more seen for utility than the art itself. But if you really think about it and drill it down, the hammer that was created is still a created thing. It's art. The person that made it a certain way to where it has, to me, like everything is supposed to be art. But if we don't see everything artistically, it then blends the line between utility and abstract, meaning we see the hammer only as a utility, only as a tool. And Oscar Wilde is saying the complete opposite. It's saying art is supposed to be useless, meaning when something's made without use, it's useless. The only thing that you can get value from it is what you see on it, the extrinsic value. Like it's almost like the art exists solely for the beauty of it. It only exists for the beauty, for the artist per se. For the artist, it should not be used or looked at as a tool for utility, because then it becomes something else. It doesn't remain in the realm of art. The second it starts being favored as a tool or utilized for something, it then will be looked at as more of a hammer than a painting. Like from the artist's point of view, it should never be seen as a tool or a hammer that's supposed to have utility whenever you create it. The artist should only see it as something that stands independently, that is useless. I mean, there's nothing, you don't rely on it for anything. There's no moral obligation to this art. There's no obligations at all. You only look at it for the extrinsic, independent value it has, which is the beauty, from the artist's eyes. Now, I do think that the critic has a whole different role in this, because then he can foster lessons from it, value from it, and stuff like that. But in the artist's eyes, it should never be looked at as a tool. If so, if you think the art you create is supposed to be used as a tool or have some kind of utility, you can structure it in a way that it does that. Like writing a manifesto. Or I think a lot of public speeches are art, but they're used as tools. It's structured in that way. Or like a lot of dystopian novels, which is, I think that kind of blends the line. Of like 1984, Handmaid's Tale, Fahrenheit 451, they're all still art, but they're tools. They're structured in a way to where this has utility outside of what it is. But for the majority of art, I don't think it's supposed to do that from the artist's eyes. I think they probably know inherently that when it's created, it'll have some value on it. Like whenever Kafka writes, a lot of Kafka's stuff has more value when you dig deeper into it. Like Metamorphosis is about alienation, The Burrow is about paranoia, penal colonies are pretty much absurd. There's more value in it. He knows that subconsciously. But I don't think the conscious eye of Kafka, he would look at it and just think, this is a tool, this will be a hammer. He's seeing it as art. It's supposed to be something that's independent from him, and you see it, just the beauty of it. Which is why I think it ends with all art is quite useless. Like that's just oh my god. When I first read it, I was like floored by it. Like this is why I love Oscar Wilde so much. This is why I had to pick up his plays, because like even though they're not novel structure, I think I'll just get a lot of value from them just by how he sees the world. Because once again, I'm a critic when it comes to Oscar Wilde's work. I can foster off the lessons and the moral value and all this kind of stuff like that. But for Oscar, he's just creating beautiful stuff. And it's independent from him. I can see it when I'm reading it. Just beautiful stuff. But that's really all I had to say. I didn't want to have a Dorian Gray video, talk about the whole story, and not have a segment about the preface. I should have put this at the beginning of the video, because once again, it's the preface of the book. But I just had to add it on. But this is actually the end of the video. Follow my Instagram, join the book club in the bio, or the caption. We're currently reading Crime and Punishment. But I'm done with part 3, so we might read Giovanni's Room end of February, maybe? I don't know, don't hold me to that, but love you guys for watching the video. Please read today and read Dorian Gray. This might be the greatest book, like, oh, I love it. It's just so good.